At Thanksgiving dinner in front of 200 guests at our family's winery, my sister Victoria raised a glass and toasted me for always knowing my place. The laughter was deafening. Hours later, my mother texted, "Victoria needs the $36,000 for her project." "Send it," I replied with just 2 words. "I'm done." By midnight, my father was on a plane home from. Victoria's voice, sweet as poisoned honey, echoed in the sudden silence. My toast, meant to be a simple gesture of family unity, had been twisted into a public slight. It was a familiar sting, a reminder that had been etched into my skin since childhood. In our family's vineyard, Victoria was the prized vintage, the one showcased in the front of the tasting room. I was the rootstock, buried underground, essential but invisible. I remember the year the powdery mildew threatened to wipe out half our Cabernet crop. I was 20 then, home from college for the summer, my head full of soil science and integrated pest management. My mother, Patricia, had wrung her hands for weeks, watching the grayish-white powder spread from leaf to leaf. My father was on the phone constantly, with consultants who offered expensive, chemical-heavy solutions that would have ruined the soil's delicate pH for years to come. Victoria had been busy planning a summer solstice tasting event, utterly unconcerned with the potential disaster unfolding in the fields. To her, the grapes just magically appeared, ready to be turned into something she could put her name on. I spent 3 nights buried in research papers in the old study, cross-referencing university extensions and viticulture journals. I found a new organic sulfur spray protocol, one that had to be applied at a very specific time, just before dawn when the humidity was perfect. I presented my findings to my father. He looked at my hand-drawn charts and the stack of printed articles skeptical. "The experts are saying we need to spray with fungicides," he said. "This is a student's theory." "It's a proven method, Dad," I insisted. "It's less invasive. It will save the soil." He finally reluctantly agreed. "Fine," he'd sighed. "If this doesn't work, the loss is on your head." So for a week, I was up at 4 in the morning calibrating the sprayers myself, driving the tractor through the misty rows of vines, the smell of sulfur sharp in the cool air. I monitored the leaves, took samples, and held my breath. And it worked. The mildew receded. The grapes recovered. The harvest that year was smaller, but the quality was exceptional. The stress had concentrated the flavors. The wine we produced from that vintage, the Solstice Cabernet, won a regional gold medal. At the awards dinner, Victoria stood on stage to accept the plaque. She wore a stunning emerald green dress and gave a flawless speech about her unwavering vision and how her instincts told her that the difficult season would produce something special. She never mentioned me. Not once. My parents beamed from the audience, their faces glowing with pride. Later that night, my father clapped me on the shoulder. "You got lucky with that sulfur idea, Chloe," he said. "That was all." I was never invited on stage. I never got a thank you. I was just the quiet girl who understood the dirt, the reliable one, the one who fixed problems without needing a spotlight. They didn't see the hours I spent in the library, the dirt under my nails, the anxiety that kept me awake at night. They just saw the result. And of course they gave the credit to Victoria. She was the face of the vineyard, the visionary. I was simply irrelevant. It wasn't that they were intentionally cruel. Not always. It was worse. And so, back at the Thanksgiving party, when Victoria cleared her throat to make another announcement, I knew it wasn't for me. Her speech about my knowing my place had been the appetizer. Now came the main course. She sighed, a theatrical sound designed to capture everyone's attention, a slight practiced frown on her perfect face. She looked at our mother, a silent cue passing between them. "As you all know, Victoria began, her voice now filled with a delicate, manufactured vulnerability. I've been pouring my heart and soul into my new passion project, the Heritage Reserve Pinot Noir. She paused, letting the name hang in the air. It sounded important. It sounded expensive. It's been an incredibly challenging but rewarding process. However, due to some unforeseen supplier costs and, well, my refusal to compromise on quality, she trailed off, shaking her head sadly. There's a slight shortfall with the project. My mother Patricia stepped forward, her face a mask of serene maternal concern. She placed a hand on Victoria's arm, a gesture of support that was perfectly staged for the audience. "It's not just a slight shortfall, darling," she said, her voice carrying across the hushed patio. "It's $36,000. The number landed in the middle of the party like a stone dropped into a quiet pond. $36,000. For a vanity project? For wine that probably wouldn't even be drinkable for another 5 years? I felt the air leave my lungs. Guests shifted uncomfortably. A few people had the decency to look away, but most just watched their eyes wide with a kind of fascinated horror. But Patricia continued her gaze, sweeping the crowd. Before landing squarely on me, "We are a family, and families support each other." Her smile was bright, unwavering, and utterly terrifying. "Chloe, darling, you've been doing so well with your consulting work, and with no husband or children to worry about, you're in the perfect position to help. We were thinking you could cover this as your contribution to the family legacy. And that's the thing about a family like mine. Cruelty isn't always loud. It isn't always a slammed door or a raised voice. Sometimes it's a quiet, reasonable-sounding request that is at its core utterly monstrous. It's the trap of normalizing the unacceptable. For years, they had assigned me a role, the responsible one, the self-sufficient one, the one who didn't need anything. But what those words really meant was the one we can take from without feeling guilty. They had normalized my contributions to the point where they were no longer gifts but obligations. My expertise, my time, my money, it was all just a resource for them to draw from. And by never saying no, by quietly accepting the unfairness, I had helped them build the very system that was now crushing me. I looked at my mother's smiling face. She genuinely saw nothing wrong with this. In her mind, this was logical. Chloe has money. Victoria needs money. Therefore, Chloe gives Victoria money. The transaction was clean, simple, and completely devoid of any real emotion or consideration for me as a person. She wasn't asking a daughter to help a sister. She was directing an asset to cover a liability. I wanted to scream. I wanted to list every sacrifice I'd ever made. The weekends I'd spent working 2 jobs in college while Victoria went on spring break trips funded by my parents. The loan I took out for my own car while they bought her a brand new one as a graduation present. The endless, thankless hours I poured into saving their vineyard only to be treated like the hired help. But I didn't. Because when you've spent your life in a prison without bars, you learn that rattling the cage only brings the warden. It's the invisible chain of the survivor. You learn that compliance is a survival strategy. You learn to swallow your anger, to bury your hurt, to make yourself smaller, because the alternative, the explosive confrontation, the accusations of being dramatic or ungrateful, the cold, punishing silence that follows, is always worse. You don't stay quiet because you're weak. You stay quiet because you're trying to survive long enough to find a door you can actually walk through. And in that moment, with 100 pairs of eyes on me, I felt those invisible chains tighten. I could say no. I could cause a scene. I could humiliate my mother and my sister in front of all their important friends. And what would happen? I would be the villain. The ungrateful, dramatic daughter who ruined Thanksgiving. They would close ranks their narrative of my instability confirmed. I would be exiled, and they would have another story to tell about how difficult I was. Or I could say yes. I could pay the $36,000, and I would be allowed to remain in my quiet, invisible corner, a functioning part of the family machine. The pain would be immense, but it would be a familiar pain, a quiet pain. I looked at Victoria. She was watching me with an expression of pure, entitled expectation. She knew I would do it. They all did. I took a shaky breath. The laughter and chatter of the party seemed to be coming from 1,000,000 miles away. Of course, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I'll cover it. Patricia's smile widened. She squeezed my shoulder. I knew we could count on you, darling, she said, her voice filled with triumphant relief. You've always been so sensible. She turned back to her guests. The crisis averted the conversation already moving on. Victoria gave me a quick, dismissive nod, a queen acknowledging a loyal subject before turning back to her friends. I stood there invisible again, with a hole worth $36,000 in my future. But in the quiet that followed their victory, a tiny cold thought took root in my mind. This was the last time. I pulled out my phone, my fingers feeling clumsy and disconnected from my body. The banking app icon glowed on the screen, a cheerful blue that felt like a mockery. $36,000. I typed the number, each digit a small, sharp betrayal of my own future. My thumb hovered over the transfer button. This was it, the price of peace. The cost of being the sensible one. Just one more signature on the unwritten contract that had defined my life. And then a sound cut through the self-satisfied murmur of the party, a car door slamming shut, harder than necessary. It was a sound of arrival, a sound of purpose. Heads turned toward the long gravel driveway. A man was walking toward us, his long coat draped over his arm, pulling a small suitcase behind him. He looked tired the way people do after a long flight, but he moved with an energy that seemed to pull the very gravity of the party toward him. It was my father. He wasn't supposed to be back for another 2 weeks. His contract in Singapore had been extended. At least that's what my mother had told everyone. Patricia's smile froze. Victoria's hand, which had been elegantly gesturing as she described her wine project, stopped mid-air. The entire patio seemed to hold its breath. My father, David, didn't look at them. His eyes scanned the crowd for a moment, and then they found me. They landed on me, and for the first time all day, I felt like someone had actually seen me. He didn't smile, just gave a small nod, and started walking in my direction, cutting a straight path through the clusters of stunned guests. "Chloe," he said, his voice low and raspy from travel. He stopped in front of me, setting down his bag. "I'm home." Before I could say anything, he looked at my face, really looked, and his expression changed. A flicker of concern in his tired eyes. He saw the strain, the carefully constructed composure that was about to shatter. He saw the humiliation I was trying so hard to hide. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly, just for me. But it was too late. Patricia was already there, her hostess smile plastered back on a little too bright, a little too tight. "David, darling, you're home. We weren't expecting you." She went to kiss his cheek, but he didn't turn. His eyes were still on me. Victoria glided up beside her, linking her arm through our mother's. "Daddy, you're back. You're just in time to celebrate." Celebrate what, he asked, his gaze finally shifting to his wife and youngest daughter. "My heritage reserve, of course," Victoria said. "And Chloe was just being an absolute angel. She's offered to help fund the final production costs. Isn't that wonderful?" She's contributing, my mother added smoothly, to the family legacy. My father looked from their beaming faces back to mine. He saw my phone still in my hand, the banking app still open. He saw the amount on the screen. His eyes narrowed just slightly. "How much of a contribution?" he asked. His voice was dangerously calm. Victoria hesitated. "Well, it's $36,000, I said. The words came out clear and steady, surprising even me. David's face remained impassive, but I saw something harden in his jaw. He looked at my mother. "You asked her for $36,000. She offered David Patricia," said her smile faltering. "She's in a position to help. We were just so proud of her generosity." "Generosity," my father repeated the word like it tasted foul. He took the phone from my hand and looked at the screen, then pressed the cancel button, the screen going dark. He handed it back to me. "No," he said. The word was quiet, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap. What Victoria's voice was a shocked squeak. "I said no," my father repeated, turning to face them fully. "Absolutely not. Chloe will not be paying $36,000 for anything." He took a step forward, and for the first time I saw the full force of his exhaustion transform into a cold, quiet anger. "I've been on a plane for 17 hours, looking forward to coming home to my family, and I walk into this. I find my wife and my youngest daughter publicly shaking down my eldest for money she worked for to pay for a vanity project after she has spent the last decade pouring her actual blood, sweat, and knowledge into keeping this vineyard afloat." He gestured around at the rows of vines visible in the distance, their leaves golden in the late afternoon Sunday. That mildew blight 3 years ago, Chloe saved that harvest. The new irrigation system that cut our water usage by 20%, Chloe designed it. The soil reports she sends me every single month, the ones none of you ever bother to read. That is the lifeblood of this business. And you have the audacity to ask her for money. The silence was absolute. The guests were frozen, pretending not to listen, but hanging on every word. Patricia's face had gone pale. Victoria looked like she'd been slapped. "This isn't a contribution," my father said, his voice low and cutting. "This is an invoice for all the years you've taken her for granted. And it is not going to be paid. Not now. Not ever." He looked around at the stunned faces, the half-empty champagne glasses, the perfect party that had just imploded. "It has become very clear to me," he said, his eyes landing on my mother, "that we need to have a serious reevaluation of how this family and this business are being run." The air on the patio went from festive to funereal. The string quartet had stopped playing. The only sound was the clinking of ice in a forgotten glass and the distant hum of the Sonoma Valley. Guests who had been laughing moments before now stared intently at their shoes, their wine, anything but the implosion happening at the center of the party. My father's words hung in the air, sharp and heavy as shards of glass. Patricia was a statue of indignation, her face a mask of disbelief. Victoria looked as if he'd just poured her prized Pinot Noir onto the flagstones. She was speechless, a state so unnatural for her it was genuinely alarming. David didn't wait for their response. He turned his gaze sweeping over the uncomfortable guests. "Thank you all for coming," he said, his voice polite but firm, leaving no room for argument. "I apologize for cutting the celebration short, but I'm sure you understand. Family matters have come up that require our immediate attention." It was a dismissal, a clean surgical cut. People began to murmur, gathering their things with a palpable sense of relief, eager to escape the suffocating tension. They filed out quietly, casting sympathetic, curious glances in my direction. In less than 5 minutes, the patio was empty, save for the 5 of us. Inside, my father said, it wasn't a request. He led the way into the grand dining room, the long oak table set for a formal dinner that would never happen. He didn't sit. He stood at the head of the table, his presence filling the room. I stood near the doorway, not sure where I was supposed to be in this new terrifying dynamic. Patricia and Victoria took seats across from each other, their movements stiff with anger. What was that? David, my mother, finally hissed, her composure cracking. How dare you humiliate us in front of our friends? Your friends? He countered, his voice dangerously low. Were they your friends when you were all laughing at Chloe's toast? Were they your friends when you decided it was appropriate to demand $36,000 from your daughter in public? He pulled out his phone and dialed. He put it on speaker, the dial tone echoing in the silent room. Walter, it's David Caldwell. Sorry to call on a holiday. A voice on the other end, crisp and professional, replied David. No problem at all. I heard you were back in the States. Is everything all right? Not exactly, my father said. I need you to draw up some papers first thing Monday morning. I'm restructuring the ownership of the vineyard. Victoria made a small, choked sound. Restructuring, how the lawyer asked. My father's eyes found mine across the room. I'm transferring a controlling interest of my shares to Chloe. Effective immediately, I'm also naming her Chief Operating Officer. She will have full authority over all operational decisions. Budgets, personnel, production, everything. The explosion was instantaneous. You can't be serious, Victoria shrieked, jumping to her feet. She's a glorified gardener. She knows nothing about running a business. This is our family's legacy, David Patricia, cried her voice, rising with hysteria. You can't just hand it over to her. It's supposed to go to Victoria. Supposed to, my father asked, turning his cold gaze on her. According to who? According to what tradition? The one where the child who actually does the work is ignored, while the one who designs the labels gets the credit. He looked at Victoria, his expression devoid of the paternal indulgence she was so used to. Chloe knows more about this land, this soil, these vines, than you ever will, Victoria. She saved the 2021 harvest. Her soil management plan increased our yield by 12% last year. Her work is the only reason your Heritage Reserve project even has grapes to ferment. This isn't a punishment. This is a business decision. I'm putting the most qualified person in charge. I'm the face of this brand, Victoria shouted, her voice trembling with rage. People come here because of me. People come here because we make good wine, my father corrected her calmly. And we make good wine because Chloe knows how to grow good grapes. Your marketing is useless if the product is compromised. And from what I've seen, your focus has been on parties and passion projects, not on the health of this vineyard. He turned back to the phone. Walter, you have all the documentation you need. Make it happen. I'll get started right away, David, the lawyer replied. I'll send over the initial drafts for your review. My father hung up. The click of the phone ending the call sounded like a judge's gavel. He looked at his wife and youngest daughter, their faces a mixture of fury and shock. This is what's happening, he said. You can either get on board and support your sister in her new role, or you can find something else to do with your time. But the days of this vineyard being treated as your personal piggy bank are over. He finally looked at me, and I must have looked as terrified as I felt. Overwhelmed, stunned. He walked over and put a hand on my shoulder. You've earned this, Chloe, he said quietly. You've earned it 10 times over. I'm just sorry it took me this long to see it clearly. I couldn't speak. My entire world had just been upended. For years, I had been the silent, invisible force behind our family's success. And now, in the space of about 15 minutes, I had been seen validated and handed the keys to the entire kingdom. The silence from my mother and sister was no longer just shock. It was the sound of a war beginning, and I was standing right in the middle of it. The long walk from the sun-drenched patio into the cool, dim interior of the house felt like crossing a border into a foreign country. The ghost of my mother's and sister's fury lingered in the air, a cloying mix of expensive perfume and raw resentment. They had vanished upstairs, their retreat as swift and silent as a predator recoiling into the shadows. My father led me into his study, a room I'd rarely entered as a child. It was a place of leather-bound books, dark wood, and the faint, sweet smell of old paper and tobacco. It was his sanctuary, a room that always felt like it was holding its breath. He closed the heavy oak door behind us, and the sudden quiet was absolute. My own legs felt unsteady, like I'd just stepped off a boat after a week at sea. The entire world had tilted on its axis, and I hadn't found my balance yet. Was this real? Was he really going to hand me control of the business, or was this some elaborate, cruel test I was bound to fail? He walked over to the decanter on his desk, poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass, and handed it to me. "Drink this," he said. It wasn't a suggestion. I took a sip. The whiskey burned a trail down my throat, a welcome fire that seemed to momentarily chase away the cold shock. "I need you to listen to me now, Chloe," he said, his voice low, his back to me as he stared out the window at the vineyard. "And I need you to focus, because what happens next is going to be difficult, and you need to be ready." I weighted my fingers, gripping the cool glass. "I wasn't in Singapore for a routine check-in," he began. "I was closing a deal with Vanguard Imports, the biggest distribution deal in this vineyard's history." I straightened up. Vanguard was a major player, a luxury distributor with a network that spanned the continent. A deal with them was the kind of thing wineries dreamed of. "It will triple our output and put our wine in every major market in North America," he continued. "It secures our future for the next 20 years. The contracts were signed yesterday morning. That's why I came home early. I came home to celebrate with my family." He turned around then, and his face was etched with a profound disappointment that was almost painful to look at. "I came home today ready to tell you all that we had secured our future. That the years of hard work, your hard work, had paid off on a scale I never imagined. And what do I find?" He let the question hang in the air. "I find my COO, the architect of our product, the woman whose expertise is the very foundation of this deal, being treated like a servant and being shaken down for cash to fund a hobby project in front of our entire social circle." The term COO still sounded foreign, a costume I hadn't yet tried on. "I didn't know about the deal," I said quietly. "Of course you didn't. No one did. But that's the point. The quality of the wine we're producing, the consistency, the very thing Vanguard was buying, that's all you. And they were about to take your money. The money you've earned to throw at a problem that exists only because of your sister's incompetence." He paused, walking over to his desk and picking up a bound folder. It was the proposal for Victoria's Heritage Reserve. He opened it, his expression hardening. This vanity project, the special barrels, the custom bottling, $36,000. He shook his head. "Do you know where the oak for those barrels came from?" I frowned, trying to remember the paperwork I'd briefly glanced at weeks ago. The supplier invoices said they were from a private grove in Mendocino. French oak, tight grain, a 24-month aging process. That's why the cost was so high. "They weren't from Mendocino," he said, his voice flat. They were from right here. He looked out the window again toward the north side of the property, the 10-acre plot on the north ridge, the one your grandparents left to you. The blood drained from my face. The glass in my hand felt slick. That plot of land wasn't part of the vineyard. It was a small wild grove of ancient oak trees my mother's parents had left to me in their will. It wasn't valuable as vineyard land, but it was sacred. It was the only piece of my mother's parents I had left. They wouldn't, I whispered. They did, he confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion. They sold the timber to a mill 6 months ago without telling me. Your mother co-signed the paperwork. Then they used the money to pay the cooperage to make the barrels for Victoria's project. They sold your inheritance to fund her hobby. The room began to spin. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was never just about the money. This was a desecration. They had taken the one thing that was mine, a physical link to my grandparents, and turned it into a prop for Victoria's ego. The casual cruelty of it, the calculated deception, it was breathtaking. The toast at the party, Victoria's condescending thanks, my mother's demand for money, it all clicked into place in a new, horrifying way. This wasn't just a family taking the responsible daughter for granted. This was a deliberate act of erasure. They weren't just overlooking my legacy, they were actively consuming it to feed their golden child. The hurt was still there, but it was crystallizing into something else, something harder, something like resolve. My father watched me, his expression grim. He knew what this revelation would do. He knew it was the final unforgivable straw. They didn't just disrespect you, Chloe, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. They stole from you. They tried to erase your legacy. He walked over and stood in front of me, his eyes boring into mine. Now, you're going to show them what a real legacy looks like. The silence that followed was a different kind of quiet. It wasn't the silence of peace. It was the silence of a battlefield after the first bloody skirmish, with both sides retreated to their trenches, waiting to see who would make the next move. My mother and Victoria were practically ghosts in the house. I'd see them in the hallways, their faces tight and pale, and they'd turn and walk the other way without a word. It was a cold war, fought in slammed doors and meals, eaten in separate rooms. I should have felt triumphant. I should have been savoring the victory, but mostly I just felt numb and busy. My father was true to his word. On Monday morning, Walter the lawyer sent over the paperwork. By Tuesday, I was officially the chief operating officer of Caldwell Valley Vineyard. I didn't move into my father's large office. I took the small, dusty one next to the bottling line, the one that smelled of damp earth and machinery. I spent the next week buried in the vineyard's accounting records. I wanted to see everything, not just the soil reports I knew by heart, but the invoices, the expense reports, the contracts, the parts of the business my family had always handled. And that's when I found it, buried in the accounts payable from 6 months ago. An invoice from a local lumber mill for specialty oak timber. There was no mention of my grandparents' land, but the date, the amount, it all lined up, and attached to it a second invoice from the cooperage, the barrel maker, with a note from Victoria Charge to Heritage Reserve Project, used timber from Lot 7. Lot 7. That was the county designation for my land. They hadn't even tried to hide it. They had just buried it, assuming I would never look, assuming I would stay in my place content to work with the dirt, never questioning the numbers. Seeing it there in black and white made it real in a way my father's words hadn't. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a calculated, documented theft, a casual act of betrayal. I printed the invoices and put them in a locked folder. I didn't know what I would do with them, but I knew I needed them. A week later, the first shot of the new war was fired. It didn't come as a shout or a threat. It arrived in my inbox as a bright, glossy Evite. You're cordially invited to an exclusive live stream tasting with Victoria Caldwell and wine influencer Julian Croft. My heart did a slow, heavy thud in my chest. Julian Croft. He wasn't the most respected wine critic, but he was the most popular. He had 500,000 followers who hung on his every flamboyant adjective. He was all about lifestyle branding the story behind the wine. He was, in other words, perfect for Victoria. I clicked the link. The event was scheduled for the following Saturday. The description was pure Victoria. She was billing it as an intimate conversation, a chance to hear the visionary behind the Heritage Reserve share her creative process. She was trying to build her own stage, to create a narrative where she was still the star of the show. It was a bold move. Desperate, but bold. She was going around my new authority around our father and appealing directly to the public. She was trying to win in the court of public opinion. I forwarded the invitation to my father without comment. He called me 10 minutes later. "I see your sister has chosen her weapon," he said, his voice tired. "What do we do?" I asked. "We do nothing," he said. "We let her have her stage. We let her talk. I've already had Walter send a letter to her and your mother reminding them of your new role and that any business decisions or public statements must be approved by you. They're ignoring it, obviously, but that's on them." Part of me wanted to fight it, to shut it down, to send another letter from the lawyer reminding her that she no longer represented the vineyard. But another part, the part that my father was trying to nurture, knew he was right. "When you give someone enough rope," he'd said to me over dinner the night before, "they'll either build a bridge or hang themselves. Your sister was never much of a builder." So I did nothing. I watched as Victoria promoted the event on her personal social media, using old photos of herself walking through the vineyard, her face artfully catching the golden hour light. She was selling a story, a fantasy, and Julian Croft was eating it up, reposting her content with captions like, "So excited to chat with the brilliant mind behind Caldwell Valley's next chapter." The day of the live stream arrived, cold and overcast. It felt appropriate. I was in my small office, a stack of soil analysis reports on my desk, but I couldn't focus. At 2:00, my phone buzzed with a notification. The live stream was starting. I pulled it up on my laptop. I told myself I was watching for business reasons to monitor what was being said about our brand. But that was a lie. I was watching because I had to. I had to see this through to the end. The screen flickered to life. There was Victoria sitting in the grand tasting room, the fireplace crackling behind her. She was dressed in a cream-colored silk blouse, her hair perfect, her smile radiant. Across from her, Julian Croft sat with a glass of her wine, his expression one of rapt adoration. "Victoria, darling," he began, his voice smooth as aged port, "tell us everything. What was the inspiration behind this absolutely divine Pinot Noir?" Victoria leaned forward, her eyes shining for the camera. "Honestly, Julian," she said, her voice breathy with practiced sincerity, "it was about honoring the land. It was about listening to what the soil wanted to say. I watched the screen, my hands clenched into fists on my desk, listening to what the soil wanted to say. The hypocrisy was so profound, it was almost artistic. The soil hadn't wanted to say anything. The soil had been screaming as chainsaws tore through the roots of 100-year-old oak trees. My oak trees. Julian Croft, the influencer, was practically swooning. Incredible, he gushed. Truly to be so in tune with the terroir. That's what separates a winemaker from a true artist. Victoria preened, accepting the compliment as her due. For the next 10 minutes they talked in circles about flavor profiles and tasting notes. She used words like audacious, ethereal, and a symphony on the palate. It was a masterful performance. She was selling a story, and Julian was her most eager customer. But I had given him a new story to chase. The night before, I had sent an anonymous email to his producer. The subject line was simple: a tip for the Caldwell tasting. The message was even simpler. You want a real story. Ask Victoria about the unique personal legacy behind the oak barrels for her heritage reserve. It's a family secret. It was a perfectly crafted piece of bait for an influencer who built his brand on exclusive content. I was counting on his ambition, his hunger for a scoop to do the work for me. And right on cue, Julian leaned forward, his expression shifting from fawning to conspiratorial. Victoria, he began, lowering his voice slightly. Speaking of honoring the land, I've heard a rumor, and you must tell me if it's true, that the oak for these magnificent barrels is incredibly special. Not just from a supplier, but from a source with a deep personal family history. Can you tell us that story? Victoria's smile didn't falter, but I saw it in her eyes. A flicker of panic, a microsecond of terror. This wasn't in her script. Oh, well, you know. She started, her voice a little too bright. We believe in a holistic approach. Every element of our winemaking process is personal. The grapes, the soil, the wood, it's all part of the Caldwell legacy. It was a good deflection, vague but poetic. For a second, I thought she might slip away. But Julian, smelling a story, pressed gently. But I heard it was more specific than that the trees themselves were a legacy, a kind of inheritance. That's such a powerful narrative, isn't it? To literally age your new creation in the wood of your ancestors. He was trying to hand her a marketing angle on a silver platter, completely unaware that the platter was a trapdoor. Victoria's composure was fraying at the edges. She couldn't deny it, not without seeming evasive. So she did what she always did. She tried to spin the narrative to make herself the hero of a story where she was the villain. She took a delicate sip of wine, a gesture to buy herself a few seconds. "You're very well informed, Julian," she said, her voice now taking on a tone of profound artistic gravity. "It was a very difficult, very personal decision. The trees, they did come from a piece of family land. An older plot, a beautiful grove that sadly wasn't being utilized to its full potential." She looked directly into the camera, her eyes wide with manufactured sincerity. It was a piece of our history, just sitting there. And I thought, what better way to honor that history than to incorporate it into the future of this vineyard, to transform something dormant into something vibrant and new. The live stream's comment section, which had been a stream of heart emojis and praise, started to slow. People were listening now, really listening. It was a sacrifice, of course, Victoria continued, warming to her theme. She was a martyr now, a visionary, making tough choices for her art. It's always painful to change the past. But you see, Julian, as a creator, you sometimes have to make those difficult calls. I believe that sometimes one person's legacy has to be sacrificed for a greater vision. She said it. She actually said it. The words hung in the air, naked and horrifying. She said it with such conviction, such self-righteous certainty, that I knew she didn't even hear how monstrous it sounded. She believed it. In her world, her vision was the only thing that mattered. My inheritance, my grandparents' memory, my legacy, it was just raw material for her masterpiece. Julian Croft was silent for a full 5 seconds. Even he, a man who traded in hyperbole, seemed stunned. He didn't know the details, but he could feel the cold, hard edge of what she'd just admitted. The comment section exploded. Sacrificed. What does that mean? Whose legacy did she sacrifice? Did she just admit she cut down family trees for barrels? Wait, I thought she said the land was dormant. Now it's a legacy. Victoria glanced at a monitor off screen, and for the first time her mask of serene confidence shattered. I saw real, undiluted panic flash in her eyes as she saw the comments pouring in. She had lost control of the narrative. In her attempt to portray herself as a visionary artist, she had revealed herself as a ruthless thief. Well, what I meant was, she stammered, trying to backtrack, but the damage was done. Julian, sensing a PR disaster unfolding live on his channel, quickly tried to steer the conversation back to safer territory. A bold choice. A truly bold choice. Let's talk about the bottling. But it was too late. Nobody was listening anymore. The comments were a wildfire of speculation and outrage. My anonymous tip had given them a thread, and Victoria's arrogance had just handed them the entire spool. I watched for another minute as she tried to regain her composure, her smile now, a brittle painted-on grimace. Then I closed the laptop. The sudden silence in my small office was deafening. I didn't need to watch anymore. My father was right. She wasn't much of a builder. The fallout wasn't a slow burn. It was an explosion. Before Victoria and Julian had even finished, their awkward, stilted sign-off clips of her legacy comment were already circulating on Twitter. Someone had screen-recorded the exact moment her mask of sincerity slipped and revealed the cold ambition beneath. By the time I went to bed that night, the hashtag #Barrelgate was trending in the wine community. I woke up the next morning to an email from my father. The subject line was just one word: impressive. The body of the email contained a link to an article on a major wine industry news site. The headline read, "Caldwell Valley Scion admits to sacrificing family legacy for vanity project in livestream gaffe." The article was brutal. It included the clip of Victoria's admission, juxtaposed with her earlier claims of honoring the land. The reporter had already done some digging. They'd found public records showing the transfer of my grandparents' land to me, and then noted its recent sale to the lumber mill. While they couldn't prove the connection definitively, the implication was clear and damning. The article ended with a quote from a respected wine critic. "In an industry that values heritage and authenticity above all else, this kind of narrative is not just a PR blunder, it's a potential brand killer." That was just the beginning. Throughout the day, it was a cascade. Forbes ran a piece in their business section titled, "When Vision Becomes Vanity, a Cautionary Tale from Wine Country." It wasn't about wine anymore. It was about terrible business ethics. My phone buzzed with notifications from friends I hadn't spoken to in years, sending me links with messages like, "Is this your family?" And "Wow, your sister is something else." The comments on the vineyard's official social media pages that Victoria had so meticulously curated with images of sunsets and happy customers, turned into a dumpster fire. "So your legacy is built on stealing from your own family? Classy. I'll never buy another bottle from Caldwell Valley. The only tasting note I get is betrayal. Hey, at Caldwell Wines is sacrificing family, part of your brand mission statement." Victoria had made her personal accounts private, but it was too late. The internet had the receipts. Her performance meant to solidify her image as the creative force behind the brand had instead defined her as its villain. By Tuesday, our distributors started calling. First, the smaller boutique shops, the ones who prided themselves on carrying wines with a story. Their story, it turned out, did not include family theft. They were pulling our bottles from their shelves effective immediately. Then came the call from the regional manager of a major grocery chain that carried our mid-range Chardonnay. He was polite, but firm. They were pausing all future orders pending a review of the situation. He didn't have to say what that meant. We were toxic. I spent those days in my small office fielding calls and documenting the damage, a strange calm settling over me. I wasn't celebrating. This wasn't a victory. It was a train wreck, and I was just one of the sober witnesses taking notes. My father called me on Wednesday afternoon. His voice was grim. "Victoria and your mother are in damage control mode," he said. "They've hired a crisis PR firm. They're drafting a public apology." "What are they going to apologize for?" I asked. "Getting caught?" "Something like that," he sighed. "They want to frame it as a passionate misunderstanding within the family. They're going to need you to co-sign the statement." I was silent. The audacity of it, even now, was breathtaking. They wanted me to help them lie their way out of a mess they had created by stealing from me. "Chloe?" my father asked after a moment. "No," I said. The word felt clean, solid. "No, I won't be co-signing anything." "I didn't think so," he said. And I heard a note of something that sounded like pride in his voice. "Good. Let them handle it themselves. Let's see what kind of story their expensive PR firm can spin without the truth on their side." They released their statement on Friday. It was a masterpiece of corporate non-apology. It spoke of deep family love and misconstrued comments made under pressure. It mentioned a private family matter that had been taken out of context. It never mentioned me by name. It never mentioned the land. It never admitted to any wrongdoing. The public's response was immediate and savage. The statement was screenshot, mocked, and torn apart in the comments. The crisis PR firm had just poured gasoline on the fire. Our vineyard, a respected name in Sonoma for 2 generations, had become a joke, a meme, a cautionary tale whispered at tasting rooms across the valley. The reputation my grandfather had built, the one my father and I had worked to maintain, had been shattered in less than a week. And it was all because Victoria couldn't resist the spotlight. The PR firm quit on Sunday. They sent an email saying their strategies were no longer viable due to an uncooperative client narrative. It was a polite way of saying they couldn't spin gold from a story made of lead. The vineyard, which should have been bustling with the last of the autumn tourist season, was silent. The tasting room was empty. We'd had over 200 cancellations for tours and events in the past week. The house was a mausoleum. Victoria stayed locked in her room. I heard through one of the housekeepers that she'd broken a mirror and thrown a lamp against the wall. My mother drifted through the halls like a ghost, her face pale and drawn, muttering about betrayal and what the neighbors must be thinking. The final meeting was on a Thursday, 1 week after Victoria's disastrous live stream. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a sentencing. Walter the lawyer arrived at 10 in the morning, his briefcase full of documents that felt heavier than any case of wine. We met in the dining room again. The long oak table was bare this time, stripped of its festive decorations. It just looked like a slab of wood in a cold room. My father sat at the head. I sat to his right. Walter sat to his left. He had arranged 3 folders in front of Victoria, and my mother, who sat opposite us, their faces stony. "Thank you for coming," Walter began, his voice devoid of warmth. "We're here to finalize the restructuring of Caldwell Valley Vineyard." He slid a document toward my mother. "Patricia, this is your formal notice of removal from the board of directors, effective immediately. Your shares will be held in a non-voting trust managed by David and Chloe." My mother gasped a small wounded sound. "David, you can't." "I can," my father said, his voice flat. "You were complicit in the sale of Chloe's land. You enabled Victoria's financial recklessness. You are no longer a responsible steward of this company." Walter slid a second set of documents toward my sister. Victoria, this is your termination notice from your position as Director of Marketing. Your company credit cards have been canceled, and you will have 24 hours to clear your personal belongings from your office. Furthermore, he continued pushing another document forward. This is an amendment to your father's estate plan. You are hereby disinherited from any and all shares or ownership of Caldwell Valley Vineyard. Victoria's silence was more terrifying than any scream. She just stared at the papers, her knuckles white as she gripped the edge of the table. And finally, Walter said, looking at both of them, this is a legal agreement of restitution. You will repay Chloe for the full market value of the timber from Lot 7, which has been assessed at $112,000 plus interest compounded over the past 6 months. The payments will be deducted from any non-vineyard assets you stand to inherit from your parents' estate. It is non-negotiable. That's when Victoria finally broke. She shot to her feet, the chair scraping violently against the floor. No, she screamed, her voice raw. You can't do this. This is my life. This vineyard is mine. It was never yours, my father said, his voice cold as the November wind outside. You treated it like a stage for your ambitions, and you set the whole thing on fire. You destroyed the reputation my father built, the one I've worked my entire life to maintain. You did this, Victoria. Not Chloe, not me, you. And you're just going to let her have it, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. The quiet little nobody who just plays in the dirt. Yes, my father said simply, because the quiet little nobody is the only reason we still have a vineyard to fight over. Patricia started to cry, quiet, pleading sobs. David, please. She's your daughter. We're your family. And what was Chloe when you sold her inheritance? He asked. What was she when you demanded her life savings in front of all your friends? He stood up, the meeting clearly over. You have until 5 o'clock to sign these papers. If you don't, Walter is instructed to file a civil suit for fraud on Monday morning, and I will testify against you both. He walked out of the room without another word. I stayed for a moment watching them, my mother broken and sobbing, my sister vibrating with a rage so pure it seemed to consume all the air around her. I didn't feel a shred of triumph. I just felt an immense hollow sadness for the family we could have been. Then I stood up and walked out, closing the door on their bitter harvest. The papers were signed by 4 p.m. My mother's signature was a spidery, tear-stained scrawl. Victoria's was a series of angry, jagged slashes. They slid the documents across the polished table without a word and retreated to their separate wings of the house, leaving behind a silence that was heavier than any argument. The war was over, but the wreckage was everywhere. I didn't move into my father's office. The next morning I walked past its grand mahogany doors and went to my small, cramped space by the bottling line. It still smelled of earth and oil of work. It felt real. My first act as chief operating officer wasn't to look at profit margins or marketing plans. It was to call a meeting with the vineyard crew. All of them. The field hands who pruned the vines in the biting winter wind, the cellar workers who spent their days in the damp chill of the barrel rooms, the bottling line team who stood on their feet for 8 hours a day. They filed into the large barrel room, about 30 of them, their faces a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. They were used to being invisible, their orders passed down through a foreman, their concerns rarely heard. Victoria had only ever seen them as part of the scenery. My mother barely knew their names. I stood before them not on a stage, but on the same concrete floor as them. Good morning. I began, my voice echoing slightly in the vast space. As some of you may have heard, there have been some changes in the leadership of Caldwell Valley. I saw them exchange nervous glances. Changes usually meant layoffs. I'm Chloe Caldwell, I continued, And as of yesterday, I am the new Chief Operating Officer. But I'm not here to talk about titles. I'm here to talk about the future. Our future. I looked from face to face at the weathered skin of men who had worked this land since before I was born, at the tired eyes of women juggling multiple jobs. For a long time, I said, choosing my words carefully, the focus of this vineyard has been on image, on marketing, on the story we tell the world. But we've neglected the most important part of our story, the land and the people who care for it. A murmur went through the room. That changes today. My first priority is to reinvest in our foundation. Starting next month, every full-time employee will receive a 10% raise. A collective gasp. Eyes widened. People looked at each other in disbelief. We're also implementing a new comprehensive health insurance plan that will cover your families, not just yourselves. And we're going to be renovating the employee break areas. You deserve a comfortable, clean space to rest. The atmosphere in the room shifted from apprehension to stunned silence and then to a low buzz of excited chatter. But this isn't just about making things better for you, I went on, raising my voice slightly. It's about making our wine better. We're going to begin the transition to fully organic and sustainable farming practices. It will be harder work, it will require new training, but it will heal our soil, and in the long run, it will produce grapes that are truly expressive of this valley. It will create a product we can all be genuinely proud of, from the root to the bottle. I paused, letting it all sink in. I can't do this alone. I need your knowledge, your experience, your hard work. This vineyard isn't just the Caldwell family's legacy. It's yours, too. You're the ones with your hands in the dirt. From now on, you will be heard, you will be respected, and you will be valued. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then one of the oldest field hands, a man named Miguel, whom I'd known since I was a little girl, started to clap. Slowly then, all at once, the room erupted in applause. It wasn't the polite, obligatory applause of a party. It was real. It was heartfelt. And in that moment, standing in the cool, damp air of the barrel room, I felt more powerful than I ever had in my life. That evening, my father found me walking the rows of vines near my grandparents' old land. The oak trees were gone, leaving a scarred empty patch on the ridge, but the soil was still there. I heard about the meeting with the crew, he said, falling into step beside me. Word travels fast. Good news always does, he said. That was a good first move. The right first move. It's what I should have been doing all along, I said quietly. I was so focused on the science, I forgot about the people. You weren't in a position to do it before, he reminded me gently. But you are now. We walked in silence for a while, the setting sun, casting long shadows across the valley. I'm selling my shares in the Vanguard deal, he said suddenly. I stopped, turning to him. What, Dad? That's your retirement. That's everything. No, he said, looking out at the land. This is everything. My legacy isn't a stock portfolio. It's this. He gestured to the vines, the soil, the valley. I want to put that money back into the vineyard. Fund the transition to organic. Build a new state-of-the-art irrigation system. The one you designed 5 years ago that I said was too expensive. I stared at him, my throat tight. You don't have to do that. I know, he said, but I want to. I spent too many years letting things slide, keeping the peace, ignoring what was right in front of me. It's time to start building again, together. I looked at the empty patch of land where the oaks used to be. It was a wound, a scar, but the land around it was still alive, still full of potential. For the first time, I didn't see it as a place of loss. I saw it as a place to plant something new. The check arrived on a Tuesday. It came in a plain, sterile envelope from Walter's law firm, no note enclosed. $112,000. I held it in my hand, the paper feeling thin and insignificant. It wasn't victory money. It was blood money, in a way. The price of trees that had been my only link to my mother's parents. It was the cost of a legacy they had tried to erase. I thought about what I could do with it. Buy a new car. Put a down payment on a small house of my own somewhere, far away from the valley. Travel. For years, my life had been about careful budgeting, about setting aside my own wants for the needs of the vineyard, for the unspoken expectation that I would always be the one to provide. Now, I had the means to do something just for myself. But the thought felt hollow. Victoria had used stolen heritage to create something empty, a vanity project for her own ego. If I used this money for myself, was I any different? Was it just about getting what was mine? I deposited the check, and for a week I didn't touch it. I just let it sit in my account, a silent, heavy number on a screen. I went to work. I met with my father. We started planning the transition to organic farming, sketching out timelines and budgets. We walked the rows of vines together, not as father and overlooked daughter, but as partners. He'd point to a section of soil and ask, "What do you think?" And he'd actually listen to my answer. It was a new language for us, one built on mutual respect instead of obligation and disappointment. It was during one of those walks standing on the scarred ridge where the oaks used to be that I knew what I had to do. That weekend, I drove to the local community college. I met with the head of the Agricultural Sciences Department, a woman named Dr. Al-Jamil, whose work I'd admired for years. I told her I wanted to establish a scholarship. Not just any scholarship. The Chloe Agronomy Scholarship. It would be a full-ride grant awarded each year to a young woman from Sonoma County who wanted to pursue a degree in agricultural science with a focus on sustainable practices. It was for the girls like me. The ones who loved the dirt more than the drama. The ones with talent, but not connections. The ones who might otherwise be overlooked. Dr. Al-Jamil's eyes lit up as I explained the vision. She saw it immediately. It wasn't just charity. It was an investment in the future of the valley. As I drove home, the late afternoon sun warming my face through the windshield, I thought about my mother and Victoria. I hadn't spoken to either of them since that day in the dining room. They were still in the house, living in their own quiet, bitter exile. There was a part of me, a small, conditioned part, that felt a pang of guilt. People always talk about family as if blood is an unbreakable bond, a sacred contract you're born into. They say you have to forgive, you have to keep trying because they're family. But they don't talk about what happens when that bond is toxic. They don't talk about the quiet poison of being taken for granted, of being told your worth is conditional. They don't understand that sometimes the family you're born into isn't a safe harbor. It's the storm. I realized then that what I was doing wasn't just about setting boundaries. It was about choosing a different definition of family. The crew at the vineyard who had clapped for me, who now greeted me with genuine respect each morning, they were becoming my family. My father, who was finally seeing me and working alongside me, he was becoming my family. The young woman who would one day receive this scholarship, whose future I could help secure, she was part of it too. Letting go of the family you were born into, or at least the version of it that hurts you, to find the one you deserve, isn't a betrayal. It's an act of self-preservation. It's how you find yourself again. I was no longer Patricia's convenient, sensible daughter, or Victoria's invisible sister. I was Chloe, the COO of Caldwell Valley, the founder of a scholarship, a woman who was planting her own legacy in her own soil. That night, my father and I had dinner on the back porch, a simple meal of grilled chicken and a salad with vegetables from our garden. "I heard what you did at the college," he said, pouring us both a glass of our own Chardonnay. "That's a good thing, Chloe. A really good thing." "It felt right," I said. "It felt like turning something ugly into something useful." He nodded, swirling the wine in his glass. "Your mother, she wants to talk to you." My stomach tightened. "About what?" "She feels remorse," he said, struggling with the word. "I don't know if she knows how to apologize, but she sees what she's lost." "It's not just about me, Dad," I said quietly. "It's about what she did to you, to this family, by always choosing one child over the other." "I know," he said, meeting my gaze. "I enabled it for too long. That's on me. But she's still my wife. And your mother." He wasn't asking me to forgive her. He was just stating a fact. A sad, complicated fact. "I'm not ready," I said. He nodded again. "Okay, that's your choice to make, and I'll respect it." And that right there was everything. Respect for my choice, no pressure, no guilt. It was the one thing I had craved my entire life, and I was finally getting it. Not because I had earned it through another act of sacrifice, but because I had demanded it by simply walking away from the table. We finished our dinner in a comfortable silence, the crickets starting their evening song in the vineyards around us. The ugly chapter was over. Now it was time to start writing the next one. 5 years passed. The seasons in Sonoma Valley have a rhythm you can set your life to. Bud break in the spring, a flush of impossible green. The long, warm days of summer, the air thick with the smell of sun-baked earth. The frantic energy of harvest in the fall, and then the quiet dormancy of winter when the vines rest, gathering strength beneath the soil. In those 5 years, Caldwell Valley Vineyard was reborn. The transition to organic was complete. Our soil, once tired and depleted, was now teeming with life. We didn't just grow grapes. We cultivated an ecosystem. Our wine started winning awards again, not just for its taste, but for its story. We weren't the brand with the family scandal anymore. We were the vineyard that put the land first. Our tasting room, once a silent monument to my sister's ego, was now a vibrant, welcoming space. We didn't talk about visionary marketing. We talked about cover crops and water conservation. And people listened. They came not for the illusion of luxury, but for the taste of something real. My father and I found our own rhythm too. We worked not as father and daughter, but as partners. He handled the business side, the contracts and distribution, the things he was brilliant at. I handled the land, the grapes, the wine, the things I loved. The respect between us was quiet, unspoken, but solid as the bedrock beneath our vines. My mother and Victoria became distant constellations in my sky. They were there, but their light was faint. My mother eventually moved out, choosing a small condo in the city over the quiet judgment of the valley. Victoria, after a few failed attempts to launch her own lifestyle brand, married a real estate developer from Arizona and moved away. We exchanged polite, infrequent Christmas cards. There was no grand reconciliation, no tearful apologies. There was just distance. A quiet, necessary space that allowed us all to breathe. This afternoon, the late summer sun was warm on my back as I stood on the ridge. The scar where the oaks had been was gone, healed over with native grasses and wildflowers I'd planted myself. Below me, a group of young women were taking soil samples, their heads bent together in concentration, their notebooks filled with observations. They were the Chloe Agronomy Scholars. The first 5 recipients of the scholarship I had founded, one of them, a bright young woman named Maya, with dirt on her jeans and a fire in her eyes, looked up at me. The mycorrhizal fungi count is 20% higher in this block than the last one, she said, her voice filled with the excitement of discovery. The new cover crop mix is really working. I smiled. I told you it would. I spent the rest of the afternoon with them, not as a boss, but as a mentor. We walked the rows tasting grapes straight from the vine. We talked about Brix levels and phenolic ripeness, about the challenge of dry farming in a changing climate, about the future of winemaking. I saw myself in them, in their passion, their curiosity, their deep love for the land. This was my real harvest. This was the legacy that mattered, not the awards or the profit margins, but this cycle of giving back, of turning a painful inheritance into a future for someone else. As the sun began to dip toward the hills, casting a golden glow across the valley, my father came to join us. He didn't interrupt, just stood back and watched, a quiet, proud smile on his face. The students packed up their equipment, their laughter echoing in the warm air as they headed back down the hill. My father and I stood there together, watching them go. "They're good," he said. "They're the best," I replied. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the last rays of sun paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. 5 years ago I had stood in this valley, feeling broken, invisible, my legacy stolen and sold for scrap. I had thought revenge would be the answer. I had wanted them to hurt the way they hurt me. But the real victory wasn't watching them fall. It was in the quiet, steady work of building something better in its place. It wasn't about erasing the past, but about planting a new future in the soil that remained. It was about discovering that the truest legacy isn't something you inherit, it's something you grow.